How many times have you started talking to someone recently about all that's been going on and you can't even get the words out? I can't. I just can't deal right now is something I keep hearing from my people. When the world hits us over and over and over and over again, we do what we need to do to make it through. Feeling numb can feel safe.
What's the word when you feel like you have one, but you actually don't?
What are the words when there are no words? Danté Stewart found out the other day while driving to a friend's baby shower.
I'm driving and I turn on BB Winans singing, "What Do You Want the Lord to Say?" And you hear nothing but like clapping and loud clapping.
Danté's heart started to quicken, almost on beat with the claps. No words made way to feel. And for the first time in a long time, Danté cried hard.
What do you want the Lord to say?
Yeah, it felt good. That's probably the only best way to describe it. It felt like I got a little bit closer to what I've been wanting to feel.
For this episode of Truth Be Told, I called up Danté because, like you, I needed a powerful message, a salve for my soul. Danté is a minister and a writer, and right after the massacre in Texas, he wrote a piece for the Oxford American called Little Experiments of Liberation. One of those little experiments in liberation involves Danté doing what he can to feel, to sit in the music, to spend time with the people he loves, and to shield the youngest of us, like his 3-year-old son Asa, from his anxiety and fears about the world. I hope you're as moved by his words as I am.
I don't want the kind of ugliness and the meanness of the world to steal and destroy whatever laughter and joy our children deserve. I think in moments of trauma and terror, it's very easy to be overcome, overwhelmed, even so, in some sense, defeated by the circumstances of our life and the circumstances we are forced to live in. And I think the choice to allow him to experience the joys of what it means to walk in school and everybody say Asa, or the joys of when I told him when he started running in front of me, I said, "You gonna leave me and not tell me you love me?" And he turns around and stops and throws his arms in a little direction as if he's about to run back to me. And I kneel down to him and we begin to say our affirmations. I am beautiful. I am kind. I am strong. I am loved. I can do anything. I will see you later. I want him to experience that because I know at some point he's going to come in contact with the meanness of the world. And I want him to have something that has grounded him enough to say, despite everything, you have the choice to stay. And some will. And that's right. And you have the choice to show up.
Those affirmations that you say to him every morning, those messages are important for him and also for you.
Indeed. And it reminds me so much of my mother. My mother made us affirm who we are because she knew that, like, if I can affirm who I am, then I can fight against what the world tries to make me or what it tries to undo in me. And that's particularly his humanity. And so when we're faced with so much inhumanity, we need an alternative imagination that accepts our humanity, fights for it, embrace it, and remind us again and again and again and again that life is not just about resisting all of this, but it's about creating something different, something better.
The reminder that we're human, you actually call this moment we're in a feedback loop of American violence that requires us in many ways to convince ourselves that we are indeed human, because being in a constant state of grief can actually numb us from our ability to feel. Can you say more about what you mean by that? Because in a way, that numbness in some ways feels like the safest place to be.
And I must agree that sometimes it is. James Baldwin has a quote that it is incredibly hard to see what we see. And I think when I'm imagining this feedback loop, the feedback loop is you're kind of in a repetition of practice and action to where this loop becomes the norm, whereby it becomes a habit and it becomes so much a habit that it is thoughtless. And so when I think about the ways in which violence and trauma and grief and ugliness and pain and terror guides our American experience, we have been on a centuries-long feedback loop where you experience violence and pain, and then, those in power tell you, you have to forgive and forget, and especially those who are of the faith perspective, you have to move on. And then you think about the news cycle. The news cycle tells you, okay, 2 weeks from now, 3 weeks from now, we may have one essay on it, we may have one of this on it, but it's on to the next thing. And this feedback loop over and over again makes us become numb to the reality that none of this should be normal. And granted, and sadly, that is the situation that we have been forced into. We've been forced into, and this is not an accident. This is actually by design, that we have been forced into a continual feedback loop to where on one hand, it's numb for sure, but like the feedback loop is also about exhaustion. If you can exhaust somebody's heart and their mind and their soul long enough, then at some point they are going to give up on trying to change the world or show up in the world as a full person. It just is what it is. And so in order for us to break the feedback loop, number one, we need help. We need a context and a country that will cherish and prioritize the well-being of its citizens rather than the power of those who are wealthy and those who are privileged. And part of me, as a person of faith, I believe that things can change. But if they are going to change, then it will take way more than just the will of those who are grieving and in pain. Because when you're grieving, it's very hard to imagine what it means to show up in the world and fight.
That's
so
right.
We need help.
Yeah. You mentioned James Baldwin. You're a James Baldwin scholar. And in your latest piece, you reference a Baldwin quote that says, "How utterly improbable it is indeed, miraculous that we can still have a drink or a pork chop or a laugh together." I'll try not to get emotional at that because I think that is the way that our people have been able to survive since the beginning of time, how humanity has been able to evolve since the beginning of time. What are you doing to feel your humanity and not live in fear in this very moment?
That question is very hard because oftentimes I do live in fear. Oftentimes I am so concerned about the problems of the world that I oftentimes forget the promise of myself. That oftentimes whenever situations of violence and pain and trauma occur, I feel like I have to force myself as a person of faith, especially, to believe that the religion of those who would rather use the Bible and the church and theology as a weapon of power and control rather than an instrument of love and liberation, I have to force myself to believe that they will not win in the end. And so oftentimes I am afraid. I am terrorized. And that's not even including the grief that we are forced into when we think about all the family members who were lost to COVID. My granddaddy had dementia, late stage dementia. And dementia took his mind, but COVID took his body. He was an elderly man. He went into the hospital I'm going to try not to get emotional too. He went into the hospital because he broke some ribs. My grandmother, they've been married for 60 plus years. She got rid of all the furniture so that nothing in the house would be able to harm my granddaddy. That even if his mind couldn't articulate where he was going, he could at least find a place of safety in the comfort of his own home in Sugar Hill, South Carolina. And my granddaddy goes into the hospital, and because of policy, He stays there. And of course, he a vulnerable old man who loves to meander and get into everything. And so few days later, literally, I get a call from my mother that granddaddy is not doing well. He's in the hospital and now they're putting him on ventilator. And granddaddy went into hospital without COVID. And 5 days later, he has COVID. And a day later, granddaddy is dead. And I'm having to sit at this funeral, having lost one of my best friends in September of last year, tragically to a motorcycle accident. My aunt died, his oldest daughter. Then literally the day after her funeral, my granddaddy dies. And the day after his funeral, another aunt dies. And if I can be honest with you, it is so hard to live and be unafraid in this moment. And we need to acknowledge that grief and terror and violence does not just rob us of our future. It oftentimes robs us of our present.
Yeah.
And I must say, I am often afraid. But when I think about what my granddaddy meant and what so many of these communities mean in the ways in which they give us more, like Baldwin said, I think I become less afraid because I realize there is more to live than just the life we've been given.
The future, you say, does not rest at the altar of power, but at the will of the people, and that dark days require deep love. What does that look like?
For me, that love means doing whatever you can in whatever way you must to remind yourself that you deserve the best things in life. I think one of the challenges we're facing in this moment is like the unfairness of everything. Like it is not fair that we live in a country where Black people who are elderly, who know the name Emmett Till viscerally as they know their own breath, have to also know the name George Floyd and have to also exist in a food desert and have to also exist in a country that fails to protect them. And then ultimately, they are murdered. It's not fair that children have to live in a country and parents have to live in a country with their children where the unthinkable, going to school, learning, instead of being infused with education and imagination, one is infused with the hot lead of bullets. And grief only remains. That's not fair. And I think when we think about things that are not fair, there really is no answer but to do whatever you must to try and love yourself and tell yourself again and again and again that you matter. Maybe that looks like going and arguing at Congress. Maybe that looks like going and writing a poem. Maybe that looks like going and getting some rest and getting away. Maybe that looks like doing an interview. Maybe that looks like reading a book. Whatever you have to do to stay intact with your humanity, that's what we must do. Because love for me, as I find it in the Bible, when Jesus says, I come that they may have life and life to the full, whatever makes us as humans come alive, then we need to protect it and do it. And as Toni Morrison say, love this flesh and love it hard.
Danté Stewart is a minister, essayist, and cultural critic. He's the author of Shoutin Into The Fire, an American Epistle. Danté, thank you so much for this conversation.
Thank you, Tonya. It's been good.
In this here place, we flesh that weeps, laughs, flesh that dances on bare feet in grass. Love it hard. Yonder, they do not love your flesh. They despise it. They don't love your eyes. They'd just as soon pick them out. No more do they love the skin on your back. Yonder, they flay it. And oh, my people, they do not love your hands. Those they only use, tie, bind, chop off, and leave empty. Love your hands. Love them. Raise them up and kiss them. Touch others with them. Pat them together. Stroke them on your face, 'cause they don't love that either. You got to love it. You. And no, they ain't in love with your mouth. Yonder out there, they will see it broken and break it again. What you say out of it, they will not heed. What you scream from it, they do not hear. What you push into it to nourish your body, they will snatch away and give you leavings instead. No, they don't love your mouth. You got to love it. I am Rebecca Carroll, reading Toni Morrison's Beloved.
Our hearts are with the families of Uvalde, Texas, and the loved ones of those murdered in Buffalo, New York. Truth Be Told is a production of TMI and is produced by B.A. Parker, Phyllis Fletcher, Aisha Brown, Enrico Benjamin, and Adama Imeson, in association with Fearless Media. Our theme music is Rest by Otis McDonald and Zora's Moon by Candace Hoyes. Special thanks to Rochelle Roberts, Sam Rafelson, and writer and cultural critic Rebecca Carroll for reading from Toni Morrison's Beloved. Rebecca is a journalist and author of several books. Her memoir, Surviving the White Gaze, is a must-read. And thank you to Heising Simons and the Ford Foundation for funding Truth Be Told. I'm Tonya Mosley.
I'll tell you what freedom is to me. No fear. I mean, really, no fear. If I could have that half of my life, no fear.